My name is Rachel Behar. I head up digital marketing here for Mahoney Performance Institute. I'm joined by my colleague, Bruce Parsons. He's our principal consultant. You'll hear from him in just a second. But before you do, we just have some quick housekeeping for today. So first things first, the chat and the Q&A function are open the entire session. So as you have any questions, feel free to put them in. We'll have a good chunk of time at the end of the session today to answer any questions. Any questions we don't get to, we will be sure to follow up with in our follow-up to make sure that everything is answered for you. Second thing, we are recording today's session, so you will get a link tomorrow in an email to the full recording. If you want to watch it back, share it with friends or colleagues, you are welcome to do that. And without further ado, I will hand it over to my colleague, Bruce.
Thank you, Rachel. And on behalf of MPI as the principal consultant, I also welcome you all to this webinar and this afternoon session. We're trying this different time of day to see if this is more readily available for people to attend things like this. But we look forward to this next hour. We have some good ideas to share with you. But what I would like to do is right off the top say the real objective here today is to help each of you think differently about the work you choose to do this week, today, and feel and be more productive and effective in your work. So to help you think differently, leading to feeling and being more productive and effective. And ideally, we'd like each of you leaving today inspired to do something differently, to start to do something or stop doing something that helps you do better, that helps you feel better, be more productive, be more effective. Honestly, we do hope you leave today with something you can start or do differently tomorrow that will help you do better as a leader, as a person, as in your work life and your out of work life, that will truly help you. And as we go forward, I do want to share that what we're going to encourage you to do is not easy to do, but it's not complex either. We're going to share some straightforward ideas with you that you could apply starting tomorrow. So what really is the problem here that we're seeing, that MPI is seeing, that there's lots of studies published about the dynamic that's in the working world today? As you see on the slide here, we're all attempting to do too much. We're striving and trying to multitask, but as human beings, we're literally not capable of doing it well. We might think we're doing it well, but there's lots of scientific data that says human beings do not multitask well. And it's affecting productivity as much as 40% across the board, across all industries, all levels of leadership, and so on. And the estimated cost of these interruptions to the American economy is something around $650 billion a year. This came from the Harvard Business Review from an article that we read to prepare for this webinar. And then what's the cost of this? Is one of the costs is huge job stress. I imagine many of you are feeling probably more stress than you may have ever felt in your working career. And that comes with a whole bunch of uncertainty in the world, a whole bunch of uncertainty in the United States, a lot of political strife. You're being over communicated with. You're getting lots of information from all different sources, and you're trying to keep up with your work life, your outside of work life, your responsibilities as a coworker, as a spouse, as a brother, a father, whatever it might be. The stress in the world is some of the highest levels it's ever been. And the estimated cost of this, if you could go back, Rachel, real quick. Yeah. The estimated cost of this nationwide might be as much as $187 billion, 70 to 90% of these losses resulting in declines in productivity. So what we're trying to address these challenges in our conversation today. 54% of workers report that stress from work affects their life at home. Almost everybody I work with shares that with me. So that statistic is higher with the people I know. And only 40% of employees who suffer from stress have talked to their employer about it. More and more employers are getting better at encouraging employees to share that they're feeling stressed, but many of us have been nurtured to not share this kind of stuff. And it's not helping us to hold it in, and it's causing the stress to be exacerbated. So with that, what can we do about it?
So one area that we talk a lot about at MPI is, deciding what to stop, right? We have so much to work on. We have so many things kind of coming at us all day, every day. So how do we decide where to even start? So Bruce, the first question I have for you today, what are some things you share with the people that you coach on deciding to reduce their workload? Where do you start when people have this problem?
That's a good question. So I typically start with many leaders with meetings, because they're very essential in business today, but they're also becoming more and more counterproductive. There's too many of them with too many people in them, and they take too long. So one of the first things I encourage people I work with to do is to evaluate the meetings they're going to and look for opportunities to go to fewer of them. So evaluate which meetings am I going to? Why am I going? Do I really add value? Am I really needed in this meeting? And if not, decline to go and stop going. Another part of that is potentially maybe you don't go and you assign a member of your team to go because value is needed from your department or your function, but maybe not necessarily from you. So this is the first step I always share with people I coach is assess the number of meetings and types of meetings you're attending and look for opportunities to go to fewer of them. And I don't mean selfishly decline, but think, am I really adding business value to this meeting? Is my presence really required? If not, can I stop going, or can I send someone in my place who can represent our function but doesn't need to be me? So that's one of the first things I do. Then we look at stop accepting new meetings that don't have clear objectives, agenda, and haven't required preparation from me. So for me, that's an early sign that meeting may not be productive. Mm-hmm. And so what we're asking you to do, and this takes some courage, is when you get invited to a meeting and it's not very well defined, it doesn't have a clear objective, it doesn't have a clear agenda you're going to follow to accomplish that objective, and you're not being asked to prepare for that meeting, in my humble opinion, that meeting is not set up for success. So consider having a conversation with the meeting organizer and ask for clarity, and consider just declining meetings that are not well defined. All right. I know that sounds like it goes against everything you might have been nurtured in your organization's culture, but it's honestly a healthy thing to do, to lead by example and consider influencing meeting organizers to plan and organize and run their meetings better. So if it's a meeting you really do have value to add to, you're going to a meeting that potentially could take less time. Mm-hmm. And then for requests that are made, so the next thing I ask people to do is assess what requests are being made of you. Are those requests really have a true business value? Can you challenge the status quo about the requests being made of you? So in other words, if a request comes to me, if I'm doing something routinely and I'm providing output to someone and I don't clearly understand what that person's doing with it and what business value it truly is adding, I'm asking some questions. Is this output truly needed? Is this something I truly need to do? Is this something we can just stop doing and not affect the business? We're not, again, this isn't selfish, unhealthy activity. It's actually healthy to look at these things and say, I wonder if this is something we need to continue to do. So look at the request being made of you and wonder, is that something that really is adding value to the business? If you don't understand it, ask some questions.
So I know what we're probably all thinking, which is, this sounds really great, Bruce, but I have a calendar that is full of meetings that I've already committed to. Some of them maybe fit this criteria and some of them maybe don't. So could you give us some ideas on how we can communicate this to our colleagues for the meetings and commitments that we've already committed to?
That's a great question. So this is the start of the conversation about how do we respectfully and professionally say no. And one of the first things I suggest you do, let's talk about meetings first. Since I shared with you, that's one of the first things you potentially should stop going to meetings where you don't add value.
Mm-hmm.
I encourage you, don't just stop going without a conversation. So every meeting that you're currently going to, have a conversation with the meeting organizer and discuss with him or her why you feel you may not need to go anymore. That, look at the past several meetings you've attended and the kinds of contributions you've made. They're probably going to be very few. And share with him or her why you don't believe you really need to attend. And again, you're not being selfish. You're just honoring your time and looking out to make sure you're working on more valuable stuff and not sitting in a meeting you don't need to be in. So you're just having a meaningful, thoughtful conversation with them about why you don't feel you should attend. Or if someone should attend to bring value, you're having a conversation with them about sending a delegate in your place, someone from your team who you believe can add the kind of value that meeting organizer needs. Mm-hmm. So it's all about meeting with them and having a conversation with them and not just, not showing up or declining without a conversation.
Sure. So if we start doing this well, what is your advice for doing this better when saying no to new requests that come in the future?
So I would suggest that, if you're getting a request, you're challenging, you're looking at that request and seeing how well it's aligned with what you believe to be your priorities, your team's priorities, and the organization's priorities. So in other words, we want to make sure what we're doing is connected to those things. And if they're not, what you want to do is make sure that they are. So, but for existing meetings as well, I would have a conversation with the organizer about, is the meeting well defined and should I attend? And I'm having a good conversation with them about that. And if not, I'm giving options for someone else to attend. If the meeting's not well defined, I'm asking for it to be clarified better. Again, all of this happens through conversation and making sure there's a good understanding between me and the requester, either the meeting requester or the task requester.
Okay, so another focus area we have is this idea of doing less and doing better. So kind of building on deciding what to stop, we have our list of things that we know are worth spending time on, right? So Bruce, can you share an example of the impact this has had on one or more of the clients that you've worked with?
Sure. And before I do that, I want to share a couple other points regarding saying no, because it directly connects to the examples I'm going to give you about people who've applied this. So it's also when you get requests of others, like I'm sure many of you are getting requests through email to do things, right? And when you do, I would imagine there's occasions when that request is not very clear, when it's buried in a multi-paragraph email. I'm going to be asking people to be more clear with their requests to me. And especially, I want to clearly understand what you're asking of me, how, and like what format do you want me to submit it, for example, like if it's a report, and at what date and time do you want me to submit it? And I'm going to be potentially negotiating a different date and time if the request feels to me like it's going to cause me to stop doing planned work and interrupting my efforts to deliver value-added contributions to others who have already asked me to do things. So when I'm getting requests, I'm evaluating them before I immediately say yes. I'm evaluating what it is. Am I the right person to do it? If not, is there someone else I can suggest? Do I have sufficient capacity to do it? If not, am I having a conversation with the requester about that? Too often, we just accept the date that's sent to us by the requester and assume that that's what's necessary. I'm asking all of you to consider, can I have a conversation with the requester and see if we can negotiate a different date and time for it to be completed so I can better fit this request into planned work instead of stopping what I'm doing and working on this thing now because the requester wants it by the end of the day. Again, I'm asking all of you to think about stop being victims of circumstances imposed on you by others and mindfully think, can you do something differently? Can you think more thoughtfully about it? Can you decide how can I actually fit this in with what I'm already doing? And often that means just negotiating a different finish date for the request made of you if you in fact are the right person to do it. So some examples of doing less and doing better. I had one coaching client that I had who was a COO of a fairly large organization. It was over 1,000 employees. So he was the chief operating officer, and he came to me distraught. He was working more hours than he ever had in his working life. He hadn't taken any meaningful time off in many months. He admitted that he was never getting done the things that he had planned to do, and he was constantly being interrupted. He was very anxious and frustrated, never feeling like he was getting the right stuff done, never feeling like he was serving his people well. He wasn't developing his people well, and honestly, nothing was going well. So we sat down and we talked about a lot of the ideas I shared with you today, but also the idea about focus time. And we discussed what it was, how to use it, how to plan for it, and to communicate that to his key stakeholders, that he was going to be carving out time to work on his commitments, and he was going to use that to get the most valuable stuff done, the things that he had planned to be his priorities. He didn't let others impose priorities on him, and he just communicated that well to all of his stakeholders. He shared that he wasn't going to be answering email immediately, and for people to stop believing that if they sent him an email within an hour, he was going to be responding, and he was going to be thinking ahead about his day and his week instead of just reacting and firefighting. So he came back a couple months later after practicing these things and shared that he was now working 15 fewer hours per week. He had taken his first meaningful time off in years. He was getting more done. He was interrupted far less. He had devoted time to developing his people. He had found ways to delegate a lot more, and he honestly felt better about his work than he had in years. And it was just by simply sitting down and thinking through these ideas and applying them with discipline. And then the next person I can share was a CIO for a business not as large. He didn't have a large number of direct reports, but because he was involved in leading the technology for this company, the vast majority of their business improvements happen through technology. And I shared very similar ideas with him about what he could do. And before he started coaching, his CEO had shared with me, my CIO is a hard worker. He's very loyal. He's been with us for a long time. I love him. He does great work for us, but honestly, he's getting to be too scattered. He's making too many commitments, and therefore he's falling down on them. and he's not getting the most important stuff done. Can you help him out? And fortunately, this person was very, was allowed himself to be vulnerable and listen. And he had readily admitted all of those things were true. And after just 1 month of applying this, and it was easier for him to apply because he had fewer direct reports who were, demanding stuff of his time, he was able to totally shift the drift. The difference in him was so noticeable that he shared with me that his wife noticed it and asked him what he was doing differently because she saw such a big change in him. And she asked him, could he share with her what he was doing so she could do the same at her work? And it was all around, creating focus time, creating ground rules for ourselves, and with our constituents or our stakeholders, making sure they understood what we were going to be doing and why, how it might affect them, so they weren't surprised by our behavior and they weren't taken aback by it. And then they just sustained these commitments to themselves, to honor the time they were carving out for themselves and use that time really, really well.
So Bruce, you mentioned focus time as an effective tool for doing better. What other solutions have you seen people use that work effectively?
So one thing that I offer is I really want to encourage people to work in email differently and more productively. What I mean by that is many of you have email on all day. I know because I've been in that world, and it takes discipline to not be. And when you're in there and there's alerts set that tell you a new email's come in, it's very hard to ignore that. It's very easy to allow that to interrupt us. So one thing I suggest they do is set time aside for working in email and be disciplined about it. And say I'm gonna be in email from say 8:30 to 10, and then 1 to 3, but otherwise I'm not going to be in it. And just allows you to prevent yourself from getting distracted by those email alerts. And with this, you need to communicate that you're going to be doing this to your stakeholders who, if they have been groomed or nurtured to believe that you're going to be answering emails very quickly, if you put into practice what I just shared, you may not answer an email, until the next day. So start sharing with people that you care about, who you email with frequently, and say, look, I'm not going to be in email constantly. I'm not going to promise that I'm going to answer emails within a couple hours. I'm going to largely promise I can respond within a day. And if you have something that's really urgent that requires my attention faster than that, then give them an alternative like text or instant messaging where they share with you, this is an urgent thing that requires other than usual urgency for email. So, being more mindful about time spent in email and not allowing it to interrupt us is one way you can be much more effective, and it will help you work on your priorities if you don't let that distract you. And then when you're going to be in extended sessions, let's say you're in a 2-hour meeting or a 2-hour training or a 4-hour retreat or a discussion, or you're going to be out of the office for 4 hours, consider using the out of office tool in Outlook that where it gives an automatic response to people who send you emails saying you're not in email and when you're going to be back in it. And then people don't even have to remember that you might be out of email, and they're getting an active response from you that tells them you're not going to be in it, so don't expect a response. It's a very healthy thing to do. It aligns people's expectations. It reduces uncertainty and wonder. And it's just a very active way of informing people what you're doing and why. And that again takes communication. A lot of these things we're sharing with all of you takes active communication with the people with whom you work most frequently. the ones who are going to be most affected by your changed behavior and decisions and choices. Some of these conversations can be uncomfortable because you might start to say no when people are used to you always saying yes. You might be uncomfortable because you might be challenging whether a meeting is worth your attendance or whether a meeting is defined well enough. But I want to encourage all of you that this is not selfish behavior. This is healthy behavior to have conversations like this with people because it drives better behavior across more than just you. You might help the requesters think differently about how they're doing things in a humble, vulnerable way. But I do want to, have all of you be mindful that this does take some courage to do well, to challenge others, to challenge the status quo on how we're slinging requests and meetings at each other when we start being more mindful about them. So another thing that I share, Rachel, is to be more planful about how we approach our work week. I happen to I'm in a mode where I spend some time on Sunday evenings to get ready for the week. Now, I'm not asking any of you to, choose to work in your off time to plan your week. It just happens to work well for me to do it that way because I know it's quiet time. I know I'm not going to be interrupted, and I can think clearly about my week ahead. I look at my calendar and I look at all the commitments, all the meetings I have to attend, the engagements I have to deliver, the engagements I have to prepare for, the content I have to develop, whatever it might be. And I'm developing my list for the week, or what are the top 10 to 15 things I know I have to do this week. And I make a commitment myself to do those things and to not let anything get in the way of doing those things. And I will generally create focus time in my calendar for those things that need true concentration time in uninterrupted time during the regular duty day, say from 8 to 5. I will block out time in my calendar to prepare for workshop, to prepare content for webinar, for example, to rehearse with Rachel. Those are scheduled in my calendar, and I don't let anything, intervene or interrupt that. So it's really planning my week out, week in and week out. So I set a date and I set a day and time each week where I'm going to sit down and look ahead and plan what's most important to me. What are my priorities based on the commitments I've already made? What must I get done to feel accomplished? Now I do this knowing that things are going to happen in that given week that are going to tend to push me in other directions. Those are those unplanned things many of you face, those fires that surface. I respond to them in the moment and decide, does this thing rise to the level of getting to the top of the line of things to do? There's sometimes that the urgency, the need, the business need says, yes, it should. And when that happens, what I'm typically doing is just making sure I finish the day with the things that I committed to do. So in those occasions, I might have to work some more minutes or hours to make that happen, but I found that it served me well. I stay on top of things and I just make that commitment myself. I don't end the day not having done the 2 or 3 most important things I set out for the day. And so that's the other thing I do is before each day, I look at my weekly plan and I say, what were the 2 to 3 things I said I would do today? And there might be 1 or 2 more that have surfaced that have become priorities based on, what's happened in the moment in the last couple days. So I'm planning my week and making commitments to get those things done. And I'm planning my days. And my days, I'm no more than 5. It's typically 3 most important things that I'm going to get done in any given day. And I'm honoring that commitment. Now, this takes discipline. It takes courage. It takes commitment to stick with this, because for many of you who do a lot of doing each and every day, you are faced with lots of fires that are put in your face I don't physically mean in your face, but you all know what I mean, that you're being asked to respond to. I'm asking all of you to think differently and say, must I respond to that right now? Can I defer that? Can I delegate that? Can I wait to do that until I'm out of focus time? I would suggest that by and large, most of the time, things that are being asked of you that appear to be imminently needed can wait an hour or two, or three or four. But you may need to have a conversation with the requester to get that clarity. So to reinforce Rachel's question is, how do we be more effective above and beyond focus time? It's managing email. Don't be in it all day. Be in it when you plan to be in it. Don't feel compelled to respond to all emails immediately. Prioritize them for what's most important and what meets your priorities. Don't let others' sense of urgency interrupt or disrupt your sense of urgency. In other words, if a request is made of you that has an unreasonable deadline, can you negotiate a different one? I always share what's in the best interest of the business, not necessarily what's in your best interest, but what's in the best interest of the business. Does this priority align with the best interests of the business? If not, can I negotiate something different? Okay. So you're always looking out for the best interests of the business, and in that way you're being selfless and not selfish. So, but also to reinforce, be more planful about how you approach your work. Set time aside each week to plan your week. Make commitments to get some 10 to 15 most important things done each week, and watch yourself do it, and break those up into 2 to 5 things each day that you're going to commit to doing. Carve out time when you need to get them done, and honor that focus time. So those are some other ideas other than focus time.
Thanks, Bruce. So just to recap to where we are. So we started by talking about deciding what to stop, hopefully to free up some time to, spend on higher value work. Then we talked about doing less and doing better. And the third and final focus area for today's conversation is all about prioritizing the right work. So the first question I have for you on this topic, Bruce, is how do you prioritize things that seem of equal priority? So we have a list of less things to do, but they all kind of seem equal in the priority list. So can you give us a framework for thinking about what to tackle first?
Sure. So for many of you, what's probably top of mind is the feeling that, our customers always come first. If they make a request to us, we've got to meet it. And I'm not here to say that that's not true. I just want to encourage you it may be healthy to challenge customer requests at times, especially when the deadline asked is unreasonable. Now, this takes a good relationship with your customers to have this conversation, but I'm again suggesting that to stand up for yourselves when an unreasonable request is made to you that forces you to stop everything you're doing and work on this for several hours perhaps to fulfill, when the clarity of the need and the urgency is not there. Give yourself permission to have a conversation with your customer to truly understand. Perhaps you can negotiate a later date. So I first want to address that one, because often that comes up, is this usually impending or unending feeling that we must automatically and blindly meet customer requests exactly as they're stated. I'm suggesting that you healthily and professionally sometimes challenge the request if it's unreasonable. Because often, and I'm saying this in the prioritization, because often many of you will put customers' needs first. And I'm going to suggest there's times when their need shouldn't be first, especially if the urgency is not there. Okay? So that's my number one suggestion there. But number two, do the same with requests made of you by others internally and challenge deadlines that to you are not warranted that are given in requests. In other words, someone else's urgency does not automatically mean it's a priority for you. So that's a way where you can reduce the number of things that feel like they're of equal priority. Is have conversations about due dates for requests made of you by others and see if you can extend due dates to accomplish that request in a more planful way. So, address your customer requests, and then for the internal requests made of you that feel like they should be done right away, but if you had a conversation, you could perhaps defer some of them or even delegate them. And that leaves you a smaller list of things, hopefully, that feel like they're all of fairly equal priority. So which one do I do? Or equal urgency. So at MPI, we like to use like two criteria to see if we can differentiate things, discover which one might be of higher importance or priority than others. The first thing we suggest you look at is the impact of that effort. Like if I have a request made of me and the impact, if I accomplish that, I can vividly see the positive impact that's going to bring the person who requested it. I can see the impact that's going to bring the business, my team. I can see the impact that's going to bring towards accomplishing a goal. The more vivid the impact is, the higher the priority it probably should be. Or conversely, look at the consequence or the severity of not doing it, right? So if you deprioritize it, what are the perceived consequences on the requester or the business or your team if you don't do it right now? So you're looking at kind of both of those as kind of the same criteria. It's the impact of doing it or the consequence of not doing it. So things that have really high consequence to the business of not doing it, that should rise to the top. Things that have really high impact when done, that will drive revenue, that will drive productivity, that will connect with our goals, that should perhaps be higher. But the other criteria is the difficulty or ease to accomplish the task. Things that are easier to do potentially should rise to the top, as long as they have the impact value as well. So I hope all of you see something that's very impactful when done and easier to do. That's a logical higher priority than something that might have lots of impact but harder to do. Okay, it has the same level of impact, but it'll take longer to do. I'm going to do the easier thing first because it's going to deliver value faster. So those two criteria can be ways in which you can analyze things that appear to be of equal importance to help you more clearly identify fewer priorities. Okay, and even that potentially could help you discover what are the top three right now. Mm-hmm. And another approach is how well is the request, the meeting connected to our goals, our team's goals, and our organization's goals. That's another way of prioritizing. If you can vividly see stronger connection to well-established goals, organizational team, or your own goals, that should be of more importance than something that isn't well connected to goals in published priorities.
So a follow-up, Bruce, how can we qualify commitments before making them? So a lot of what you just covered, speaks to commitments that we've already made, but how should we think about qualifying commitments before we make them in the future?
Right. So it's a good question. So Rachel's saying, well, when I get a new request for a commitment from somebody, how can I qualify it before accepting it? In other words, instead of just blindly saying yes, or what most of us do is we don't say anything and we intend to do it. The most healthy thing you can do is respond actively, whether you're going to do it or not. But the things you should consider before you accept it are, can I vividly see the connection between this request and things that I know of that are company or team priorities or goals or objectives? If there's a really good connection, I'm going to be inclined to say yes. Then I'm going to look at, am I really the right person to do this? Very often, if the requester's making it of me, they've made the right decision. I'm probably the best to do it, but I may be overwhelmed and I may know of like someone on my team who could do this instead. And I might ask the requester if I can delegate this to someone else and actually transfer responsibility to them. Or it may even be a peer that I know who could do this better than myself because it's a strength of theirs. So the second thing I'm looking at is, am I really the best person to do it? And I ask each of you to think about that each time. Instead of just blindly saying yes, are you really the right person to do it? And then the third thing I'm looking at is the deadline being requested of me really justified? Are there good business reasons to warrant whatever date it is they're asking for? And I think that too often there's no date and we just assume they need it right away. So, but don't do that. Make sure there's a clearly defined date by which you're expected to do that, make that commitment or meet that commitment, so you can make it a really informed decision about whether you're going to do it. And truly don't just assume that the requested date from the requester is justified for business reasons. It may just be because that's when they want it. And I'm not asking you to be a jerk here and just push back on everything. But if you don't see how that thing that's being asked of you can be so important that you have to do it by the end of the day or by tomorrow, have a professional, respectful conversation with the requester and see if you can get a different, more realistic finish date. So those are three ways I can share with you. There are ways you can qualify commitments before you make them.
Awesome. So during our presentation here, we've gotten some good questions in through the Q&A in the chat box. So Bruce, I'm going to do some rapid fire with you on some of these. So the first one I see here is, you stress the importance of communication. Can you share some tips on how to handle these types of conversations when communicating with a superior who is making requests of you?
Right. So, I mean, it is going to be most uncomfortable to have a conversation like this with a superior because, traditionally we're supposed to do what our superior asks of us. And I don't dispute that, but I think it's healthy sometimes to challenge the request, especially to get clarity on what it is you're supposed to do, but also to potentially negotiate a different finish date. But what it takes is really just gathering your thoughts, asking for some time with your supervisor, and talking about the request that's made of you, and ask some really good questions consistent with what we talked about today. I would suggest most of your supervisors would respond well to that. I agree that some may not. You all know your supervisors better than I do. And I'm not asserting that each and every time it's going to be received well, and that's why it takes courage to do it. You've got to decide, am I willing to, have a difficult conversation with somebody about this, again, in the best interest of the business, in the best interest of the team, and not in my best interest, right? So when we are working more productively, we're getting better stuff done. When we have more time, we're spending better time with the people we're leading, we're developing them. We're actually serving the business better than when we're overwhelmed and on that hamster wheel and we're caught up in the doing. So all these uncomfortable conversations you might have are well intended. They're intended to enable you to work more productively and effectively. And most leaders should respect that.
We have another question that says, I have a colleague who is consistently sending me urgent tasks to complete that are usually of pretty high priority. It's clear they are not as proactive with this type of activity, since this type of activity is largely reactive. Do you have any ideas for how I can reset the expectation that I cannot keep handling these fires on a daily basis?
Yeah, so this is where an opportunity for you to share knowledge with them that you might have about being more planful about our work, right? This often happens when you get these urgent requests from people. It's because they're caught up in the doing, they're not thinking ahead, and they're just reacting to what's in front of them and just firing stuff off without a lot of, a lot of thought, with maybe not thinking at all about what you might already have on your plate, and just share ideas with them about how they could be more thoughtful and planful about their work and less reactive. Now, you may not think you can do that with a colleague or a peer, but I would suggest in a healthy culture you can. You may not think you can do that with your supervisor, and it might not be the easiest conversation, but when it's done in the best interest of the team, and the team would you would benefit by them being more planful about how they approach their work. It's a healthy thing to do. And I don't mean to sound like a know-it-all here, because I'm not. This comes from 40 years experience of trying these things out and knowing that it can be uncomfortable. But it's a choice we make. We can either just be victims of our circumstances and just tolerate these unending requests being made to us with, largely unwarranted deadlines, or we can stand up for ourselves and choose to do something about it. So it's, again, having a conversation with the people who tend to, send you urgent requests to get stuff done if you sit back and look at it and wonder, could they have given me more time if they were more planful about their work? In a lot of cases, yes. So it's just having a conversation with them. You could potentially help them feel better about their work.
So the last question I think we have time for is a question about keeping track of commitments. Do you have any tools, tips, or ideas to help keep track of commitments as we agree to them, so that we don't reach the point of burnout where we feel overwhelmed and we can kind of raise the flag before feeling that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And at MPI, we actually do have a tool called the Commitment Register that can help you to do just that. What we'll do is we'll share that tool with everybody who's attended. And it's not a fancy tool. It's just, what have I committed? To whom have I committed it? And when is it due? And that, by writing that down and having it written down, it creates a visible tool for me to see all the things I've committed to doing. Too often we're keeping this stuff in our head and it's wearing us down. We're worried about that commitment we've made that we might have forgotten about, that commitment we've made that it may be due tomorrow and we don't remember it. The more you can get in a practice of writing this down and having it visible in front of you, the better data you have to understand what your current state situation really is. For example, that second example I gave you of the CIO, the first thing we had him do was do a complete inventory of all the commitments he had already made, to get a clear understanding of how overcommitted he really was. He knew that he was. He just didn't understand how bad it was. Once he wrote it all down, he realized, holy cow, I've got to do something about this. And not that he didn't already know that he needed to, but seeing it in writing and seeing the volume of stuff he had committed to doing, it just presented the problem in a different light and it made it more compelling. So find a way to be, it takes discipline to do this, because you gotta sit down and write it down, the what, the who, and the when. But it can be a very effective way of keeping track of what you've committed to do and by when. And I encourage those of you who lead others to keep this record, so when they have one-on-ones with you, they can report the progress of their commitments to you. So you're not always the enforcer asking them for progress. They're pushing information to you instead of you pulling it. But a commitment register is a good tool to use that with, and we will share that with everybody in the follow-up email to this.
Awesome. Thanks, Bruce. I hope everybody on the line here has gotten as much out of our conversation today as I have. To share just a few key takeaways that I'm walking away with, and Bruce, feel free to share any that you are. But a few things that stay top of mind for me. So the first is the fact that setting boundaries is healthy, especially when they're communicated professionally and politely. It's important to recognize that, like you've said, and kind of stress throughout this conversation, Bruce, it does take courage and it takes a willingness to have some uncomfortable conversations, but it is in service of you and others doing better. Doing so allows you and your team to do better. It helps you to work in a more realistic environment. So you're working on a more realistic timeline. You have a more realistic volume of work. So you feel a lot better about the work that's getting done because you actually have time to complete it. And the third is kind of overcoming the stereotype of being selfish, right? So a lot of times we feel like when we're setting a boundary or we're telling somebody that we can't do something, that it's an act of selfishness. And it's actually the opposite, or at least at MPI, we believe it's the opposite. You're being selfless. You're freeing up time to do more valuable things. You're serving yourself and your organization in a higher value way because you've set these healthy boundaries. Bruce, any other key takeaways from your end?
Yeah, some reinforcement of what you said and a couple other things is, it really comes down, everybody, to choices you make and decisions you make. And one of those decisions is choosing to not be a victim of your circumstances, to take more control over what's happening to you. You've heard the statement, we can't control what's happened to us sometimes, but we can control how we react to it or we respond to it. And we're suggesting here is one thing to stop doing is stop just assuming you have to accept everything that's asked of you. And, start thinking mindfully about, is it the right thing for me to do? Is the deadline appropriate? Is it a reasonable request? And that takes the courage to make the choice to have that conversation with yourself and others. There's no silver bullet here, but it is straightforward. I think I started today by saying, what the ideas we're going to share with you are not easy, but they're also not complex, right? I think you would agree that everything we've talked about today is very straightforward. It's honestly very simple. It's just not comfortable to do. But I'm asking all of you to equate discomfort potentially with value. Is give yourself permission to experience some discomfort by having some challenging conversations, all in the spirit of serving your team and your organization better, because you're being much more mindful about what you're choosing to do and not to do. All right, and as we wrap up here, we want to remind each of you about let's stay connected. We've got some upcoming programs that we encourage all of you to consider. Either if you have already participated in, maybe recommend to your colleagues to participate. We have public leadership programs. Our next version kick off in September. We have personal leadership, team leadership, and organizational leadership. Personal leadership is for individual contributors and sometimes even new employees. It gets them a good grounding on how to be an impactful employee and contributor. Team leadership is for leaders who are leading others, who have direct reports. First and second level leaders. It's a great program. That also starts on September 6th. And then we have organizational leadership, which is for leaders of leaders like directors, VPs, and the like. That program also starts on September 6th. And we do those in a hybrid format where it's largely learning online with some 90-minute check-ins that happen live online. So it honors your time. You spend less time in a classroom, but you can still get all the learning done. And then we also have some webinars coming up, one on Wednesday, July 27th, and another one on Wednesday, October 19th. You'll hear more about those in emails to come. But we also encourage you to consider, connecting with us on LinkedIn. Follow us on LinkedIn. Rachel's great at sharing content all the time that might be helpful for you all. And we love having more and more people follow us. But also feel free to check in with us. Rachel, are we going to do a follow-up here like we did last time?
Yep. So we can set some time aside if anybody has any follow-up questions to connect directly with Bruce. Otherwise, like I said in the beginning, you will get an email tomorrow with a link to the session. a link to all of the sources that we had mentioned, and then a version of the tool that Bruce had mentioned during the presentation as well. So you can expect to hear from us tomorrow.
All right.
Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Have a great day, everybody.